Hello biologists, this is part 3 of lab 3.10. Let's talk about diffusion. This is the jar that I put the food coloring in the beginning. You can still see there's kind of an area of greater concentration of food coloring in the middle here, but mostly it's diffused throughout the jar and it's much more towards equilibrium than it was in the beginning. The jar is almost uniformly blue. And just to show you that you can diffuse food coloring more than just across water, I put a little bit on a cube here, and you can see the blue color is diffusing into the agar cube. So at the end of part 2, we talked about is diffusion a form of passive or active transport, and we decided that it's passive transport since it does not use energy. For number 11, use what you've learned to write a paragraph answering the following. Why are cells not 1 liter? Why do cells stay small to effectively use diffusion to move materials in and out of the cell across the cell membrane? Does diffusion use energy? How does being small help a cell survive and be efficient? How do small cells help large organisms maintain homeostasis? In order to do that, let's quickly look at our 1 liter cell. We can see here in our big cell here, you can see that there's a clear area along the edge here. That's where the vinegar is diffused into our big 1 liter cell. Remember, this cell here is 10 centimeters. This is our giant cell here. I'll cut into this big giant cell, the Texas cell here. And you can see that only a little bit, the outer edge of this giant 10 by 10 by 10 centimeter cell, there's only a little bit of diffusion around the cell. So it's going to take a long time at this rate of diffusion to go all the way across the cell into the middle. And if this was oxygen or carbon dioxide coming out or oxygen going in, the cell would take a very, very long time to diffuse those materials. The cell would practically end up having to use energy to move materials in and out of the middle of the cell. And if a cell has to use energy, then it's not very efficient. So big cells are not very efficient. It takes a long time to drive across Texas, where if you have Rhode Island, you have a little cell, you can get across Rhode Island very quickly. The rate of diffusion is the same, like the miles per hour in your car. Here's Rhode Island, here's Texas. Texas takes a long time to drive across. Rhode Island is quick. Diffusion here of a small cell, you can get the whole thing diffused very quickly. The rate is the same, but the time it takes, total time, is less for this tiny little cell, which is very efficient. This big cell, very inefficient. It's going to have to use energy to move things in and out of the middle of the cell, and so cells stay small to be efficient. The most efficient thing that an organism can do is have many small cells that can diffuse really quickly, like this little tiny cell. And all of those cells can diffuse things across the cell membrane and into the middle of the cell quickly and be very efficient. So organisms have many small cells instead of a few big ones, because they can use diffusion, and diffusion is passive transport. Passive transport doesn't require energy. Cells cannot have to use energy to move small molecules across the cell membrane. So our final question is, how did the surface area to volume cube affect the rate of diffusion? Now we know that driving your car across Rhode Island or Texas, you have to go at the same rate of speed. Speed is in miles per hour, a rate. But the total time it takes to drive across Texas is greater. And if you are a cell, you don't want to have to drive across Texas every time you want to get carbon dioxide out or oxygen in. To maintain homeostasis, you want to stay small and stay efficient. Cells stay small so they can use passive transport, diffusion in this case, to move materials through the cell in a reasonable amount of time. Big cells take far too long to diffuse. Remember, rate of diffusion is the same, but the time it takes to diffuse an entire cell is different. It's very small for small cells, so cells stay small to be efficient. Thanks much for coming, everybody. Stay small and stay efficient.